I was about to say good morning, but it's actually good evening where I am. Yes, I was going to be presenting on our paper on implementing an attrition model at scale. I take it from your nodding, Sasha, that you can hear me fine. Excellent. Okay, so what I'm going to cover during this session is a brief history of our project, the challenges that came with us sort of taking the baton, taking over a project halfway through. Some of the key learnings we took, and probably the most strongest of which was change the language, and then through that you change the nature of the message. The power of listening and the unpredictable nature of academics, and where we've got to now that we are 4 iterations into the project. So for those who don't know, RMIT is a large dual sector institution here in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. By dual sector, we have both higher education and vocational education. The focus of this particular piece of work has just been in higher education. We have similar projects underway in our vocational education space and in our higher degree by research space, but they are separate from this particular paper. What is of probably note for this particular paper is that now that we are this semester in our 4th iteration, is that we are now operating at full scale, which is about 580 separate programs within the university. So to the project, happily named Early Warning Signs, or EWS. The original project actually came out of our strategy office here at the university, and they actually developed it initially with a separate analytics team. So we are the learning analytics team that sits in the education portfolio. But instead they actually developed it with the analytics team based inside the finance department. And so a lot of the focus was around financial loss and talking a lot about attrition. And this became really the strong message that was passed by the team when they were talking to some of the main project stakeholders like the program managers. Now, when you're talking about, you know, as it says there, $130 million per annum, we're not talking about small chips, and it tends to put the wind up a few people. But as I'm alluding to with my spoilers, is it didn't really align with what was coming out of the executive, with what the program managers wanted to hear and wanted to talk about. There was a real misalignment there. And it sort of also spoke to the nature of the challenges when you're dealing with language and communications. So we set about learning from their mistakes as much as from their successes. They had been through 2 initial iterations, the first 2 semesters, which were for 20 programs and 40 programs respectively. In the third, when we took over the delivery, we did 80 programs, and now, as I said before, in the 4th, we are now at full scale with 580 programs. Probably the big thing that happened in those first couple of semesters is they ran a lot of face-to-face sessions because they were dealing with a small number of programs, and they were kind of a mandatory meeting for these program teams, and we were able to sit in on some of those in the 2nd semester. And it was a bit of an eye-opener for us, and it started our thinking in terms of what we were going to do, because we were coming in and, you know, anyone being told that they must attend these sessions is going to come in going, what's this about? And they really did take, you know, our observations was they really did take that defensive position, and it was taking the first 10 to 15 minutes of the meeting to realise that they weren't there to be told off. They weren't there to be, you know, wrapped over the knuckles for the poor performance of their program or anything like that. But then that tended to then move to a whole bunch of data being thrown in their face, and, you know, all with the best of intentions. Like, you know, the guys who were doing it, they genuinely were trying to do the right thing. But the messaging that was coming across was like, okay, here's all the data, here's your program, here's the problem, what are you going to do about it? And it didn't necessarily hit the mark with the target audience, with the academics. And there were lots of people in the room. They had people from our team, and they had people from some of the other central support groups. But what they didn't have is they didn't have people there with learning and teaching experience. They didn't have people there with pedagogical knowledge. And it made it really difficult to have a conversation about what kind of changes you could be asked to do when you've got a room that's half full of data boffins and the others are around there from a support perspective. And the other one was probably that all of the conversation was about attrition and reducing university attrition and the money that this would save the university. So when we took over, and you'll have to excuse the animated GIFs, my team thought that they were, trying to present themselves as a 1970s heist crew. Unfortunately, what you get is our LinkedIn photos. And that is, the main point of this slide is really to say, while some of us have taught in the past, none of us are pedagogical experts either. What we are experts in learning and teaching data and the techniques and processes that we apply to that. Some of us have taught in the past, and some of us are still a little bit involved with that, but largely our focus was trying to be good at what we do and try not to tell other people how to do their job. What we found was it worked really well if we were pretty transparent about what we did know and what we didn't know, and respected what other people's expertise was. So when we took over the project, we decided what we really wanted to do was to redefine the problem, redefine what the intent was. And so we shaped the project to be more around stopping talking about attrition, stopping talking about finance, and instead starting to talk about student support and how do we produce better student outcomes, and how do we help the academics do that? Because we're not a student-facing service. We deal with the academics who are delivering this content and shaping the learning. So we reframed it in a way that basically said they're the experts in what they do. We're the experts in what we do. Let's combine powers and see what we can come up with. Now, this wasn't necessarily aligned to the original brief, but it did allow me to still stand up in front of management and tell them that yes, the focus was still to reduce attrition. We just wanted to change the language that was being used here because the difference was pretty marked when you change the nature of what you're talking about. A little bit about the data that we're using here, and again, you'll have to pardon my team's GIFs. In fact, I can do this. So what they wanted to say here is that, look, we do have a lot of data at the university, but really it came down to two main sources that we were looking at here: our student information system and our learning management system, Canvas. Now, we've got decades of data sitting there in our SIS, it goes all the way back, but we actually only moved to Canvas about 2 years ago. So we don't have a lot of data there to build training data sets and things like that. We did a massive search. We retraced the steps of the previous team, and we did our own additions by looking at other systems around the university. But the best we could get to was 30% coverage. And one of the issues that we had with the techniques that had been used in the first couple of semesters was a bit too much of a reliance on imputation. And we wanted to avoid that wherever possible. So in the end, going through our fairly rigorous feature selection, we ended up with about 130 variables, but really it came down to 30 main drivers, and most of those came out of our SIS. Again, with the help of our friends Laurel and Hardy, our experience here was it's less about the modeling. That's the fun part. That's where we all get to dig our teeth into it and enjoy it. But really it came down to making sure all the rest of it worked, making sure you had a robust platform to deliver this, and making sure you had access to the data that you needed, making sure that your audience had the right permissions to see the data you were going to be presenting. It was surprising how many hoops we had to jump through both IT and legal. And what we discovered very early on, and to be honest, from a bit of experience of previous projects that hadn't gone so well, was don't try and use sticky tape at this point. You want to glue these things properly and make sure it works, because if it doesn't, the whole thing falls over. And so for us, we went through all the processes that we needed to with our privacy team. We went through all the processes with our IT teams. It was at times bizarre and slightly odd that we were trying to organise to get permission for academics to see information they already had access to in a separate system. But we did it, and the result was getting people the data that they required and that they needed. So yes, modeling's great, but make sure your pipeline works. So getting to the point of the actual delivery for our experience, we went about a process of trying to establish some credibility. We had been presenting this stuff for a couple of semesters as a university, but with the change of, the people responsible for it, we wanted to establish that we were a trustworthy data source. So we set about creating like a summary document, a PDF that was really just a breakdown of the individual programs by their demographic nature. And we delivered that alongside the EWS. Now, our experience or our expectation was that they would look at it and they'd go, wow, yeah, okay, they're looking at the same data we're looking at. Okay, so there may be some, legitimacy to what they've done. And instead, what we got back was, holy crap, I've never seen this before. And we were stunned. We were genuinely stunned that this was information that they hadn't seen. We knew that there were other parts of the university. I mean, there are 4 large analytics teams at RMIT, plus there's another 3 sort of smaller teams in each of our 3 colleges. We know that they're all building dashboards and they're all putting together data sets for these academics, but these academics were telling us that they'd never seen this stuff before. This was data that was new to them, and we were genuinely surprised. So it had the desired effect of establishing some credibility, because they looked at it and they're like, wow, this is awesome, but not in the way that we had expected. The other thing is that the response we got when we had our face-to-face sessions with them, they were optional this time round, was that change in language that I talked about before, stopping talking about the finance, stopping talking about attrition, and starting to talk about how do we support these students, how do we, try and help them get through the semester, through the course, stay the course of their program. Really was far more what they wanted to hear, and was far more directive in terms of where they wanted to go. Their buy-in was almost immediate. They came into the room ready to go, and we just didn't see that when we'd sat in on the previous sessions. And it really, those sessions were really, really great for us. They came in with ideas and requests, and what we found was if we did our job of delivering them what they wanted to see, they bought in all the more in terms of what we were asking and what we were showing. And we also made it clear, again, that transparency about what it was we were doing and what we weren't doing. If they were interested in the model, then we would pull it out and we'd show them all the process we'd gone through. But really the focus almost always turned into a constructive conversation about some of the actions they were thinking of doing. And it was a very different constructive conversation. And this sort of speaks to it as well, which is our job in that situation. And call it whatever you want, iterate, was to listen and then deliver on what we were being asked. A really great example for us on this one was we had a whole bunch of academics looking at this stuff, and one of them piped up to us and said, hey, what would be really helpful is if I could click a button on your Excel sheet that you've given us, and that would take us into the SIS and let us look at the full academic history of that student so that I can understand, what's happening, or what has happened in the past. And we were like, oh, yeah, okay, we can do that. So we looked at it, we put it in, we made it happen, and we rolled it out across all of the programs, and all of a sudden there was a whole bunch of people going, wow, this is a really useful thing. And again, we got that buy-in because they felt like they were getting listened to and that we were responding to what it was they were asking for. So it was a strong process. It was time consuming for us and a lot of work, but we made it happen. The other part was increasing the number of outputs, because as Hassan was talking about before, the early start of the semester is often where things are fairly critical. So trying to make sure that we were getting those outputs out as often as we could was really an effective point. So 6 months on, we've done our first iteration. We're now into our second, or the university's fourth iteration. We did a bit of a feedback loop with the academics who participated, those 80 programs, and it was overwhelmingly positive. Everyone who sort of engaged with what we were doing really did come back to us going, this was great, do more. Although we were a little bit surprised by how low the bar seemed to be. It sort of spoke to that people weren't necessarily listening to the academics and giving them the tools that they needed to be able to do their job better. So the two pieces that I think are probably worth noting on this slide is really where we started to talk about the critical feedback, where people were basically saying, yeah, it's great, but we need the support. And part of that for us has been getting the colleges and the schools more involved, which is that they now have visibility of this stuff, and they are actually now participating and trying to be that other piece that was missing previously of having the academic support. The data literacy is the other one. We did see a real difference in terms of people saying, yeah, too much data, we can't deal with it. But when we know there's an appetite for data at our university. The difference between now and 5 years ago is astonishing. Like I said, there's 4 large analytics teams at the university. The challenge for us instead has been getting people to know what to do with it when they get it. And so we're actually contributing to some development work on some data governance, data management, data literacy credentials for our staff to actually participate in. And finally, the requests. The sheer volume of requests that we got for a dashboard. Could you just put all of this into a dashboard? So this semester, we gave them a dashboard. And so what we've ended up with, and I'll just run through this relatively quickly, is a simple page that lets them know who their main contacts are in their college, who they can get in contact if they want to unpack this even further, or if they want to talk about what supports are available. It's right there on the first page. We also drew attention to the fact that coronavirus, some of you may have noticed it's disrupting the way we work, has an impact on this stuff. When we're starting to talk about student enrolment activity, which is a behaviour that really does impact on their risk score for us. When you're looking at the way that students are behaving right now and changing their enrolments, that mimics what we would have called at-risk behaviour, which then puts the model slightly at risk. And we'll continue to train it throughout the semester as we go, and we will get across it, but we wanted to make sure, again, that transparency, flagging early with them that what they were looking at did have some issues that were being informed by the nature of the situation we find ourselves in. This is the next sort of iteration of that piece I talked about before, about providing them with some overview of their data. It's been alarmingly a real key for us in terms of unlocking some of those locked doors to the staff, providing information and letting them see a bigger picture of the nature of their cohort. This is I guess the meat and potatoes of the situation. This is a list of each of the individual students. It had started as a score out of 100. By far and away, the feedback we got was, what is the point in the score that we should cut it off? Above what score? If it's, is it above 75? Is it above 80? Where is the cutoff? So what we actually found was more useful for them was to simplify it down to having those high, medium, moderate, and low, and that was really much more consumable for them. Finally, a bit of a glossary, a bit of a help, again, a reminder of who they can reach out to, a little bit of FAQ there. Look, it's early days for us. Right now, the initial feedback has been pretty positive. And funnily enough, those academics that we'd worked with previously who are participating again, they're still coming back to us with more ideas and more constructive feedback, and we're finding it really really constructive and really positive, and we'll see what comes next for next semester. Our final slide, I won't go too much longer, and I can leave this for you guys to sort of consume. These were sort of, I guess, our main takeaways from the process that we've been through, and some of the challenges that we face. My personal favourite is probably the last one. Anything you can do to get your IT department on side is always a good idea. So that's our, I guess, our presentation. Questions?